Okay, welcome to another episode of Thoughts and Bolts. I'm your host, Pedro Laveria, and today we're going to talk about the Kona Blue Consciousness Center. And for me, this is probably the most interesting part of the Kona Blue documents that were released by Arrow, and you'll see why. What I want to focus on in this episode is defining some of the terms used in the Consciousness Center section so we can have an idea of what it is, these special access programs may know about consciousness, which I think is extremely important. So, first of all, Kona Blue. What was Kona Blue? Well, you can pause this video and read Arrow's description of what Kona Blue was supposed to be. Um, Basically, according to Arrow, some of the whistleblowers who came forward said that non-human biologics were being stored in some compartment, a compartment, uh, I don't know, another bigger program called Kona Blue. And they looked into it and, oh, look, there is no such compartment called Kona Blue. What they found were information slides that they later released to the public, or at least that's what they wanted everyone to think, that Kona Blue is just some prospective special access program that never got off the ground. But let's listen to what the former head of WASAP, Dr. Jim Lacatski, has to say about Kona Blue.
Did you say we cannot talk about Kona Blue in past tense? I need you to elaborate on that.
Kona Blue is much more than Kona Blue. I can answer that directly, but I can't go into details. Kona Blue was a compartment. It was also a program. You can, if people knew what they were reading that was released, knew what is between the lines on what DHS, Department of Homeland Security, released, which, by the way, was a very good write-up. There's a key sentence in there. Let people find it. A very good write-up. But the thing is what's to do with a compartment? Now, am I agreeing with what has been said in DHS's and what has been said by Arrow about Kona Blue? All I can say is,
Okay, so I'm going to read between the lines and assume that there is some active element or component to what we are calling Kona Blue. Let it be an operation, a compartment, whatever. You can't talk about it.
It's not a compartment. That's secure.
Okay, so it's not.
A program continues. It can be unfunded. It can be funded. It can be temporarily funded. Money can go in and out.
So a UFO study program could continue under that.
And remember what we asked. In the rear, it was with a lot of thought. Column wrote it in the rear portions of Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. He suggested private money going in from multiple sources. And I can tell you now that caught people's eye.
Okay. So, I mean, George, that's new to me. Isn't that great?
It is. Dr. Lacatski, the picture that's been painted to the public by assorted people and debunkers and counterintelligence operatives is that Kona Blue was a crackpot idea. It went to Department of Homeland Security. There were some discussions, but they eventually decided there's no value in this. That's what we've been told. There's no value. It's a bunch of crazy stuff going on. And it is completely contrary to the process that you described in the earlier books.
Absolutely.
That Dr. Tara Toole and others recognized the value of it. They wanted it to go forward. Somewhere up above intervened, and the public is told it was killed right there.
Yes, and that the program was not killed. You can't kill Kona Blue. At one point in the near future, you'll start seeing it, because I suggest to Dr. Kelleher that there be a book after these four, and I want the public to participate because it will be my interpretation and my statements that were made in DHS. I was not in favor of some things because I knew that I could never ask Congress for that amount of money. There was no way.
So, yeah, so George, go ahead. I got a bunch more.
Dr. O'Toole, Dr. Tara O'Toole, you met with her. She's a brilliant person, has made no public comment, to my knowledge, about the Kona Blue process, the discussions that were had. She's staying away from it, and I don't blame her. But can you share with us some of what you've already reported and might report in the future about the value that she did see in approving that to go forward?
I can't talk about that because we have to also talk about DHS interests. Okay. And I need approval as we move forward past what the Pentagon has already released. You got enough clues in there, by the way. People just haven't looked at it because they just took Arrow's assessment. Oh.
There's a lot to unpack there with regards to what Dr. Lacatski just said. If you watched this show before, you'll know that Kona Blue was the prospective leveling up of OSAP. They were expecting to receive UFO material from previous crash retrievals from Lockheed Martin, maybe even an intact craft. They were expecting to receive that Bigelow Aerospace. And in order to do that, they had to go from being a classified program, OSAP, to a special access program, which was apparently Kona Blue. But I mean, Lacatski said Kona Blue can't be killed and that a program continues and that we need to actually read the document and read between the lines. So I want to focus on the Consciousness Center, specifically the certain terms that were used that I think that just everyone ignores. Okay. So just a quick recap, Kona Blue had several divisions. You can pause and read here: data collection, experimental, a medical division, to basically like study people who were killed by UFOs or got sick, radiation poisoning, burned by being in close proximity to UFO, a data analysis division. But they also had an advanced technology center. And as I read this, based on what we've covered so many times on the show, advanced technology is a euphemism for the crashed UFO material, right? Access recovered advanced technology and any earlier assessments to determine threat capability and any potential countermeasures against the advanced technology, and collect oral histories from already identified sources, retired military intelligence and contractor personnel to assist in locating additional recovered advanced technology, right? And as we've talked about in the past on the show, that the oral tradition is, orality, oral tradition, from mouth to ear is how a lot of this information is kept, immune from FOIA, immune from, Russian computer hacks and that sort of thing. So part of the Advanced Technology Center was going to the retired people in military intelligence and, the contractor community, and, hearing from their lips where this stuff is still being hidden, right? Because it's that hidden, it's that compartmentalized, it's that obscure, right? That you need to actually talk to the people who have the information in their skulls to actually find out. And it appears in some cases. But, there's a consciousness center, right? And if we expand to actual section, it talks about, the consciousness center being a place that manages the acquisition, training, and utilization of remote viewers and communicators. Remote viewers and communicators. Okay. It goes on to say that they wanted to develop remote viewing and remote communication countermeasures. Remote viewing and remote communication countermeasures. That suggests that at least up until 2010, there weren't any countermeasures to remote viewing and remote communication. But what is remote communication, right? We just assume we might know what that is, but we're going to look into what it is. They wanted to extend remote communication programs to communicate and retrieve data across dimensional space-time barriers. They wanted to study consciousness interactions with and control of technology. We know what that means, right? They wanted to see if they could actually get the crash UFO stuff to work using the mind, right? Or at least that's how I read it, based on what we've covered so many times on this show and what whistleblowers have testified to. And they wanted to conduct experiments to determine baseline parameters for physical transport across dimensional slash space-time barrier. Okay, now that's interesting. These are the three things we're going to focus on today in this show. Okay. Now, remote viewing. This is old hat. Okay. If you don't know by now, uh, clairvoyance is real, and Stanford Research Institute started a program which got taken in by the CIA and the DIA and SAIC and all these other places that housed it at various times. There was a protocol that was developed that would allow people who have a talent in clairvoyance to get even better at it. And there was a teaching protocol and an actual protocol to make sure that this was all honest and accurate, right? So here's a really good document. I'll put the link in the description later. But basically, it's an issue of studies in intelligence. And to your right, you can see an example between a target and a drawing by a remote viewer. This was done by the late, great Pat Price, who was arguably the most powerful remote viewer of his time. And yeah, he drew the target totally blind, double blind, no hints whatsoever. He drew the target. Okay, so that's remote viewing, right? It's seeing without your eyes things that are very far away and hidden. But what about remote communication? Well, remote communication is telepathy. Okay, remote communication is telepathy, and we don't just have one document to support that interpretation. We have two. Okay, remote communication is normally considered to be mental telepathy. Okay. Okay. So here's my question, right? There are remote viewing training programs, there are remote viewing protocols, there's remote viewing technique. Is there telepathy technique? Is there telepathy training? Is there telepathy protocol that has not been declassified, right? Because the remote viewing stuff, a lot of it, not all of it, has been declassified. Well, we don't hear anything about remote communication. And if you go on CIA FOIA, you won't find anything on it either. You'll just find documents that mention its existence. Okay. So that's interesting. Very interesting. Okay. Is remote communication or telepathy, right, on the level of remote viewing, aka clairvoyance, in the intelligence community among some very special, talented, and trained people? I don't know, but I mean, it's this is weird, right? None of this has been released, but it would appear that that might be the case. Okay, so next, conduct experiments to determine baseline parameters for physical transport across dimensional space-time barriers. What does that mean? Well, I have a clue. Eric Davis was part of OSAP. Eric Davis wrote this paper 20 years ago. Okay, and I'll put a link in the description, right? And it's very standard scientific fare with regards to all the possible ways that teleportation might be achieved. But the most interesting chapter to me is chapter 5, when he talks about teleportation vis-a-vis psychokinesis. Okay? And I recommend you read this on your own. But he goes into these studies that were done in China and that the DIA later translated into English. The Chinese government has people that do parapsychology too, right? Our own remote viewing program in the CIA was a response to Russian parapsychology, right? Their own intelligence community, their own military was researching parapsychology in all its aspects, right? Telepathy, telekinesis, clairvoyance, you name it. Okay. And we didn't want to be left behind, so we did the same. Okay. That was the whole Stargate program. That was how remote viewing came into be, right? Um, the Russians had a lot of information from the Nazis as well. Davis talks about this in his paper. He goes into the whole history of the military and intelligence's interest in parapsychology and their leveraging of it. And then he gets to the Chinese studies. And the Chinese studies are really interesting because um, using very, strict protocols and everything that you're required to do as a scientist, right? They were able apparently to find people who could teleport things from one place to another using their mind. Okay. For example, the time required for the teleportation of test specimens through various barriers was anywhere between a fraction of a second to several minutes. And this was not dependent on the test specimen that was used, the sealed container that was used, which experimental protocol was used, or which psychic was being used. Okay, so this was done in various studies, right? And they were sending different things. They were sending bugs. They were sending little gadgets with a transmitter, right? And when the thing would disappear, either the signal would disappear or the signal would become very weak, which is weird, right? And then, it would reappear within seconds or even minutes, right? In a different location, right? In a different room, that kind of thing. Just really weird stuff, right? Like before and after passing through the container wall/barrier, the test specimen and the container's wall barrier were both complete and solid objects. The gifted psychics were never allowed to see or touch each of the test specimens or the sealed containers before and after the experiments were conducted, and only the experimenters touched the specimens and containers using, these double-blind protocols. Okay, and these experiments were all repeatable, right? So Eric Davis, knowing about what was going on in China and being part of OSAP, it's very likely that you know he had some input into Kona Blue's interest in that sort of thing, right? At least he was one of the people who did, right? Um, but yeah, this is what they were into. Okay, so we have remote viewing, we have remote communication, and in the case of Chinese parapsychology, there seems to be psychokinetic teleportation, right? And some of these experiments were done with cameras that taking like a bunch of pictures per second and that sort of thing, and it appeared like some guy was passing an object through a glass cup, and this is all just really weird, right? But this is what they were into. And so if Kona Blue exists as a program, it may have something like the Consciousness Center, and they may be trying to um, replicate what the Chinese parapsychologists were doing vis-a-vis PK teleportation, that is psychokinetic teleportation, remote viewing, and remote communication. In other words, clairvoyance and telepathy. Okay. Like I said, I'll put some links in the description to some of those papers. I found one of them. Okay. I found another one, which is basically a summary of parapsychology in the PRC. But this is all very interesting. And it just goes to show, there's the science you learn in school, and then there's the science that's in the black world, right? And they may overlap, but they're not the same, right? And if you want to talk about breakaway civilization, right? That concept, there certainly does seem to be a subculture within American, Russian, even Chinese uh, cultures that has a very different worldview, a very different ontology than the rest of the culture. And that worldview and that ontology is more complete. Okay. And that's why disclosure is so important, in my opinion, right? Because I really do believe, what the man from Galilee said when he said that the truth shall set you free. Okay. So, clairvoyance, telepathy, and psychokinetic teleportation. Is this what people are capable of? Let me know what you think in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe. And as always, I just want to remind you that your consciousness is not classified. Okay. They can hide a lot of things. They can hide artifacts of all kinds, whether they come from space, the ocean, another dimension, the future, whatever, wherever they come from, they can hide that stuff. But they cannot hide what is most proximate to you, what is most proximate to me, and that is our subjective awareness. So play with it, experiment with it, learn to meditate, get a book on remote viewing, do whatever it takes to really understand what it is to be conscious and what consciousness is. Okay. Because that's not classified and that can't be kept from you. So with that, I bid you good night.